welcome to Beyond the Bio. Stay tuned this week because I have Lottie in the studio talking all things podcasting. So if you're interested in podcasting, perhaps you have your own show or you're thinking about having your own show, or maybe you're a podcast skeptic, then keep listening because we are talking about podcast trends and what is happening right now in that world of podcasting. Welcome, Lottie.
Hello.
Nice to have you back.
Yeah.
Yes, back on the show. Because, of course, we did a show a while ago now.
It was when I first started, I think. Probably.
Wow. So what's that, like a year ago? A year ago. So we did one called Podcasting Basics. So we'll link to that in the show notes. And that was really to get people started with podcasting. So if they wanted to do a show, but perhaps they had no budget or didn't know where to start, and you helpfully provided lots of guidance around the equipment that they needed to get started with no to low budget. So I know that's been a popular episode. And I thought because, we're a year on, we've been producing lots of podcasts here at Moja, I thought it would be a great opportunity to get you back into the studio from across the corridor.
All the way.
All the way from across the corridor to talk about what we're seeing in terms of the trends within podcasting at the moment. So one of the things that I hear when I'm out and about a lot is, someone else is bringing out another podcast. Everyone's got a podcast. Do you hear that?
I think, everybody says that, like, everybody and their nan's got a podcast. And I think that we see it in our world because obviously people are coming in to do podcasts all the time. But if you think about it, like, you think that everybody's got a podcast, but there's actually only, say, on your social medias, LinkedIn and stuff, there's only a select few, and they probably are the same people who are popping up all the time. And I think to be in, like, the top percentage of podcasters, you only have to do something like 6 podcast episodes to be in that top percentage of podcasters, because a lot of people, they start it, they do 1 episode, they either get bored, they pick too niche of a topic, so they run out of things to talk about for every podcast episode, and they just lose consistency and then kind of give up after 1 or 2 episodes. So that's something to bear in mind, I think, when you're starting out, is not everybody has a podcast. And if you find your niche, find something that you're going to be able to talk about for a long time, commit to doing it long term to keep up that consistency, then you will.
Podcast not just for Christmas.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, this is the thing. And I think I do see that a lot. And I suppose there's a few factors that influence that, isn't there? So, if someone's working with us to do a podcast series, for example, then they've invested some cost and time and cost into doing it. And typically our clients would come in and do it as a season, right? So then if there's other things that happen in the business or they can't afford to do it, then that's going to kind of slow them down. But the reality is anyone can start a podcast, but you really got to be consistent. And I think you've given some great suggestions there around being sure that you've got something to talk about for long enough. So, my podcast is pretty niche, it's fairly niche, but I do still have enough to talk about each week, thankfully, because my show is coming out every week. And, you've got to really put that thought into it. And I think that's where, some of the things that I've seen are either people running out of money because they want to outsource it, they run out of money, or, they want to spend their money elsewhere. They feel that they've not had a really quick return on putting the show out, or they haven't got the time to do it, or they run out of stuff to say. And I think the consistency piece is really key, because what I've seen some people do is they commit to, right, I'm going to bash out a show every single week, and then they kind of miss a week, or they bring it out on a different day, and it just becomes a bit higgledy-piggledy. And I think if you're trying to build an audience, you need to be consistent. So if people are really loving Beyond the Bio, which if you are, please subscribe, leave a review. Haven't asked you that for a while. Those things are really important. And if someone, I listen to a handful of shows every week. So I know when that show is going to land and I'm ready to listen to it because that's part of my routine. If for whatever reason it came out, a show I like to listen to on a Monday wasn't there, then I might then miss it that week because I don't want to listen to it on a Wednesday because I'm busy on a Wednesday or whatever. So I think there's something around the consistency that helps to grow the show.
Definitely. And I think just turning up every week, and the thing about yours as well, which is good, is that you do have guests on it, but if you haven't got a guest for some reason, you can do one by yourself, and not being afraid to kind of have that as a plan B, just to keep up that consistency rather than putting all this pressure on, like having the perfect finalised episode every week. I think sometimes having the consistency like rules over that.
I think that's really good advice. And I remember when I had Teresa Heath-Wareing on the show, and she actually talked about how I think her first 20 episodes were just solo episodes because she wanted to get confident speaking herself before inviting really good. She had some really big guests on as her first guest, but she wanted that consistency and for her to be comfortable, I suppose, talking. Because if we think about clients that we see with podcasts, their first couple of episodes, you can probably tell the difference in their confidence and their, how fluid they are in terms of that first episode versus a more recent episode. So actually, that's quite sensible. And I think your advice there around being able to do solo shows as well, for us on Beyond the Bio, that gives us a lot of flexibility because it's a bit feast or famine sometimes. If I've got a lot of time to record episodes with guests, or I've got a lot of guests waiting to record shows, sometimes we've got like 8 in the bag. We're like, we've got months worth of content here, and then all of a sudden you're like, there's nothing to go on Monday, and I can just pop into the studio and record something and think of a topic and talk for 15-20 minutes. So that does give you that flexibility so that you can keep to the schedule. And I remember back to the Teresa episode, her talking about how even when she had really significant life challenges, she was always able to commit to that show coming out every Monday because she did have a few in the bank, and she could be quite flexible in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's building that trust as well with your listeners, because they're expecting to hear from you every week, and then if you're building trust, they're going to trust you more and want to buy your products or look at your businesses, what you're trying to promote through your podcast if you are promoting stuff.
Yeah. So with some people, they give up because they think, oh, I should be getting 10,000 downloads a week and I'm getting like not very many. And that can be a bit disheartening when you've spent a lot of time planning out what you want to say and getting it edited and all those things. What would you say to people that are early on in their journey and they have got small download numbers?
So what we've been saying a lot to people is imagine, so if, say you've got 20 downloads on your first episode, that's not bad. You imagine 20 people in a room that are all listening to you and are engaged in what you're having to say. You would be happy with 20 people sitting in a room listening to that. So bear that in mind when it translates over to podcasts, because even if it's 20 people, they might get something really good out of your podcast episode and learn something from you, which then means that they're going to take action because of that. It depends, obviously, as well, your reasoning for doing a podcast. But in terms of when we're doing it, in terms of building a professional profile, if people see your podcast being advertised, that's just building into that whole kind of
brand awareness piece,
profile
isn't it?
raising. Yeah.
I think that's really wise. And I think it goes back to what's your objective for doing the podcast? Because is it a vanity thing? Do you want to be able to go, hey, every week 10,000 people download my show, right? And for some of us, like, I would love that. If I was able to come in and go, hey, 10,000 people listened to this episode last week, that would be super cool. But actually, would I rather have that and have zero interaction with those people, or would I rather have 20, in your example just there, who were genuinely engaged, who all got in touch and said, I want to work with you, or I want to do something. So I think you've got to work out what are those metrics that you're measuring. So I was chatting to a client recently who was saying that they had picked up quite a lot of prospects through their podcast. So it's quite early on. I think they're only in episode 3 or 4, but that they'd already had conversations with people, and that was off the back of the podcast. And I thought, well, surely that's the best metric. And, what is it that you're doing it for? And most of the people we work with are doing it to enhance their profiles, to build their brands and have that bigger awareness across different platforms. Most of the people, all of the people we work with, none of them would be doing it to become the next influencer, right?
Yeah.
They're not doing it for that reason.
No, exactly. And also on that point is that people want the big numbers because they want to get advertisement to make money. Whereas actually, if people are listening and engaging and buying their product or service, surely that's more of a win than getting however many pence from the advertisers.
That's a really good point. Have you seen any good examples of where people who are starting out are promoting it really well? Because you've got to get some listeners, haven't you? And you do want to see some growth. It would be a bit disheartening to put the show out every week and have dwindling numbers. So have you seen anyone, whether it be a client or whether it be anyone else in the space, putting stuff out and promoting it in any clever ways?
I think the podcast launch is a big one. I don't think it really matters if you do it in person or online, but I think as long as you're engaging with people, you're sending out big reminders and stuff for the podcast launch, that's going to be where you're grabbing the attention of the listeners in the initial phase. So I think that's really important. Sharing newsletters, blogs, that kind of thing, sharing it on your social media, email signatures, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're good. I like it when I do have a guest, if they share it. So you can't expect that they're definitely going to share it. Although some people whose shows I've been on, I've had to sign something to say I will share it when it comes out, which is an interesting approach and actually not unreasonable. If I'm going on someone's show and they make me sign something, say I'll promote it, I think that's actually fair. I don't think I would ever go down that road for me with my guests. I just hope that they do want to share it. Because you wouldn't be able to enforce that in any case. So you just make it easy for them to share. So you give them the graphic, you maybe give them some copy or whatever, just to make it really easy. And I definitely notice a difference when the guest shares it. And sometimes it's not always the guests with the biggest profile sharing it that get the most downloads on it. Sometimes it can be people where I wouldn't necessarily expect to be lots of downloads. But I think one recently that worked really well for us was when we had Ollie Barrett on talking about panels. And I'd wanted to get Ollie on for a while because I think he is literally like the guru of panels. I said that on the show. He's so good. And I knew that by having him on, he speaks so well and he's so knowledgeable with so many examples. I knew the content would be really good. Obviously, we sent him the links and the graphic and he did share it. And he wrote a really engaging post that went alongside it. But I think what then really helped that was lots of people commented on it because they think he's awesome as well. And lots of people shared it. And even in the last few weeks, even though that episode came out a little while ago, I'm still getting tagged in the odd thing where someone says, oh, you should listen to this episode. And that's one of our biggest, that's one of our highest downloaded episodes in the whole of Beyond the Bio ever, that one, because it's good. So we need to get them back.
I think it's about being strategic about who you're inviting onto your podcast. So it might be somebody, as you say, with less followers, but if they've got a really engaged audience, I've seen it with some of our podcast hosts before. They've got a smaller audience, but they're all really engaged. But they share it with their social following, and it just, it's like one of the best episodes compared to like having the bigger names on the podcast. It's just because they want to hear that person on the podcast.
Yeah, sometimes when you have someone that's never been on anyone's show before, they're the best, aren't they? So, I'm thinking about when one of our clients had someone on who'd never done a podcast before, and then he shared it with literally everyone he knew. He emailed it to like 400 people, and that one did really well. So there's something quite interesting in that. Let's talk numbers because I think this is interesting and sometimes surprising to people. So which countries are leading the way at the moment in podcasting?
So the US are the top. I think they are always pretty much the top.
They're always top.
Yeah, so they're 42.2% of listeners, which is massive compared to the next one.
That is so big, isn't it? I mean, we knew podcasting was big in the US, but the next nearest country is the UK, right?
Yeah, which is 6.8%, so it's a massive difference.
That is wild, isn't it? You wouldn't think... I wouldn't have thought the UK would be second. I don't know where I would have thought, maybe some Asian country, but I wouldn't have thought us.
I think it's because of the language and them being produced in English and stuff. I have seen some cool stuff where there's some podcasts that translate them now. But big numbers. And
That's wild because you look at some other countries and there's so many on this list that are like 0.1%, 0.2%. Lots of countries that are kind of in that. And maybe it is the language because if you look at who comes next, you've got Canada, Australia, they're English-speaking countries. So maybe you're onto something there. But I think that UK stat is going up slightly. I think that's a little bit higher than last time I looked. So that's interesting. But yeah, I definitely need to get on more US podcasts then if that's where the audience is.
Yeah.
Jeez. What other stats? Let's talk about episode downloads because that's what everyone focuses on when they think about stats for podcasts, right? They want to be in the top 1% who think about that podcast pyramid analogy when we had Dan Priestley on talking about getting on the big shows. But, you said before about someone getting 20 downloads. Obviously, that doesn't feel like very many, but where would that put them in terms of average stats?
You see, I think this is what is surprising to people. So to be in the top 50% of podcasters in the first 7 days of your podcast being released, you need to have 28 downloads to be in the top 50%.
That seems so low, doesn't it?
I know. And then to be in the top 25% of podcasters, you need 110 downloads.
Okay, so it's quite a big jump.
It's quite a big jump, but it's still
realistic.
I think, yeah, it's still definitely realistic for even if you're just starting out, I think. 465 to be in the top 10%, and then 1,089 top 5%, and 4,709 for the top 1%, which I think is surprising because you see stuff, everybody's obviously Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO, they're like the top ones, and he gets millions of listens. What is it, 5 million listeners? Something wild.
It's got to be insane because he's literally top of the charts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but 4,000, I guess.
I mean, I know people that are in that top 1% with normal shows. We're not there yet, but it's something to aspire to. So, you know, that feels a bit more achievable. I suppose you've then still got to think about whether you still feel that that's worth your time. But like you say, that thought of having all those people in the room, hundreds of people in the room each week, like engaged with what and interested in what you've got to say, then that shows that they're it's signaling their level of intent straight away there, aren't they? So something else I've noticed is around episode duration. So there's some trends in that. You know, I think in previous years we used to see a lot of these super long episodes, didn't we? You know, especially the Stephen Bartlett. And I think because he's so established, he can get away with those really long episodes. But what's the sweet spot right now?
I think it's definitely going down and people are preferring shorter episodes. So the sweet spot is between 20 to 40 minutes. That's the best kind of time. And I think if you're wanting to create a podcast, I think do it from your own point of view. Like, how long would you like to listen for? They normally say it's commute time, which obviously in the Northeast it differs from place to place, but commute time is probably half an hour, 40 minutes. So yeah, I think the long ones, I don't know, me personally, I see that it's 2 hours long and I get put off by it. So.
Same.
And you end up listening to the first 15 minutes just of adverts, so yeah.
That drives me nuts. The ones that have adverts on right at the start, oh my God, I've got to really want to listen to that to sit through that, because that really frustrates me. I think you want to get straight into the content and the meaty stuff. And I think, yes, those ones that are sort of 2-3 hours long, you know, Stephen Bartlett, I used to love his show. Like, I absolutely loved it. And he had great quality guests on. And now I only ever, you know, I used to listen to it every week. Now I will look at who's the guest and I'll look at the title. So I'll see how, you know, clickbaity it is.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple of things I'm now looking for. And if it was someone really awesome, so say I like the business ones, and he doesn't get so many of those anymore, but say he has an amazing business person on and the title looks sensible, then I would probably listen to it on my commute like throughout the week to get through
exactly
it.
That. So it takes so long to listen to it.
It's like a full saga.
Yeah. Another one, I was just going to touch on it before when we were saying about sharing your podcasts and growth. Another trend is cross-promotion on podcasts is becoming a way to better promote your podcast. So going on to other people's shows, having other people's on your show, just discussing at the end about your podcast. If you find people in the same niche category as you, then it means that their listeners are going to want to listen to your podcast. And one case study had seen that it was a 21% increase on downloads month by month. So that is something to keep in mind as well so if you're starting out a podcast, keep in mind the time of maybe trying to promote it on other people's podcasts, speaking to other people with podcasts, because I know that's something that you've been doing as well.
Yeah, I think that helps. And it's thinking about, you know, don't just say yes to every single podcast, because you can just get distracted and you could just be doing podcasts all the time. But again, this is why it's useful to refer back to the podcast pyramid episode, I think, with Dan Priestley, because he gave some really useful insight into that. But like now, you know, I get approached to go on quite a lot of podcasts, and I think sometimes I'm a bit conscious of not saying yes to everything because I don't want to be everywhere. But then I think about it and I think, hang on, actually, from speaking to Dan, I think, actually, that's okay, because not everyone, someone would have to be a Sophie Milliken super fan to want to go and listen to all of those. The reality is I'm trying to get in front of these different audiences. So all these shows I'm going on, they don't all have the same audience. So I'm not going to sicken people, I don't think. And I'm trying to talk about different things on shows, so I'm not just saying the same thing. So I would hope now that every show I go on, I'm giving something different that if anyone did listen to all my shows hadn't heard before.
I think it's as well about the planning of it. So it's being what you're wanting to get out of going on to that podcast. Again, if it's to promote your business, you want to make sure that the listeners of that podcast are going to be interested in buying your business from you, that kind of thing.
How often should people be putting shows out? What are the trends there?
I think, again, we said we wanted to keep up with consistency, but I know a lot of our clients, they do it every 2 weeks, which 38% of podcasts come out between 8 and 14 days.
So that feels fortnightly.
Yeah, fortnightly is probably, most people do that.
They're on trend.
They're on trend. But it's like keeping up the consistency, but then factoring in how much time you have to commit to it. Because I know that weekly can be a bit much for some people.
And I think, again, that's where people need to think about how long the episodes are, because if you're doing those 3-hour ones, I mean, these big hosts, they must literally just be recording podcasts all the time.
Yeah.
So, which, you know, I can understand actually would be quite fun. I wouldn't mind doing that some weeks, but yeah, it's hard to keep the consistency up when you're doing that. So that's another argument, I think, for short and sweet.
Yeah, short and sweet. And I think as well, if you do it once a month, that's sometimes a bit too far in between. So yeah, I definitely think that the 2-week mark is the...
And as well, I guess it goes back to what are your objectives, because for some people, infrequent ones, that might be okay, but I think as a rule, it makes sense to have more frequent, shorter, and be consistent around the time and the day that it comes out. And yeah, the time thing I think does make a difference as well, because you get most of your downloads in the first 24 hours. So really you want it to come out as early as possible on the day in the time zone that people are most likely to listen to it in, right?
Yeah, again, as we said, like if people are listening to it on the way to work, you just said that you would listen on the way to work. So you want it to be out first thing in the morning. So we normally schedule ours to go out 2 a.m. That means that when people wake up, whatever time they wake up, it's there ready for them to go. So
good shout. Well, Lottie, it's been a blast talking about all things podcasts and getting caught up on what the latest trends and stats are. If anyone listening wants to talk to you about podcasts, should we pop your LinkedIn profile in the show notes and probably your email as well?
Yeah.
And then if anyone has any burning podcast questions or wants to explore how we could help them, whether it's in person in our studio in Newcastle, or if they want to take advantage of our remote option, because we're working with clients all over the place to do their podcasts, then they can hit you up.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you're serious about growing your profile, take our free profile assessment quiz to see where you're at right now and get hints and tips on how to improve your score. You'll find the link to the quiz in the show notes. If you've enjoyed the episode, it would be mint if you'd subscribe, like, and leave a review. See you next Monday.